from written word and spoken word. Lead us to Jesus Christ, the living word, for we ask it in his name. Amen. I had just delivered what I thought to be an excellent advice to students starting their secondary schooling. And I took as my subject the parable of the talents and pointed out to the young people that they should use all their abilities to further themselves in life. This was before the Uniting Church, I might add, because at the end of this, the Presbyterian minister sought me out and said, very interesting, but have you ever had a really good look at that parable? And I must confess I hadn't, so I had another look. And if you look at the 25th chapter of Matthew, you'll find that he talks about signs of the end, 10 bridesmaids, talents, and the last judgment. And as I read what the commentators were saying, they said Jesus was not moralising about the use of personal gifts. He didn't tell stories like Aesop's fables. His parables had bite. Now, I know that talent has come into our language, but this is really a story about reckoning and about a final reckoning. Where does the emphasis fall? It falls on the third servant. Cautious, complacent. He expected praise for playing it safe, but he was condemned as a hoarder and being too careful and fearful. And not only that, the money belonged to someone else. It was a breach of trust. So I had a look at this and to try and find out who was this third servant. And in Matthew's Gospel, he is the pious Pharisees criticised so much. He observed all the law, but kept to himself what was intended for the whole world. Now, to be fair to them, we see them at their worst in the New Testament. But they began as a revival group to recall people to a pure faith in the true and living God. But over time they became harsh and hypercritical and selfish and exclusive of people with those intentions often are. Their aim was to save the nation from sinking into the sea of heathen culture. But judgment came, and some of the strongest words of Jesus were directed at them. And so this morning I just want to talk about two things. And the first is this: the church can be the third servant. There's always a risk when we try to decide between freedom and legalism. It may be tough to tithe and fast and keep the Sabbath, but it's a whole lot easier than loving your neighbour and forgiving and accepting. And the risk is between preserving the faith from the outsider and taking the whole gospel to the whole world. Guided by their master, the first Christians did, although not without some misgivings. And the temptation of the church is to avoid taking risks. We hear people saying we need to express the gospel in new ways, even though the gospel does not change. Interesting example. John Wesley became dissatisfied with the Anglican Church, and so he founded the Methodist Church. William Booth became dissatisfied with the Methodist Church, and so he started the Salvation Army. And a Salvationist called George Brown became dissatisfied with the Salvation Army, and he moved to another group. We can be preoccupied with our own interests or our own survival. Exclusivity, legalism, strictness are no guarantees we will preserve the faith. The only way is to make it known far and wide, and that can be risky. Many years ago, I worked in the public service in New South Wales, and it was a time when they were starting a new university in Sydney. I had to go through hundreds of applications for lectureships and pre-see them so that the committee could find out details about the people before they interviewed them. Now, it's interesting that when that university started, the churches introduced chaplains. So there was a Catholic chaplain, and there was an Anglican chaplain, and there was a Methodist chaplain and a Baptist chaplain. The interesting thing was that within that area in Kensington, there had been an industry for over 100 years, and no one had thought about having chaplains to them. And what was it? The racing industry. Obviously, university students are all right to go to, but beware of the bookmakers and the jockeys and the owners. Dr. Wyatt T. Walker, an American preacher, tells the story of the 4 lepers in the Old Testament. And he says that they had 3 choices. Go back to where we were and we will die. Stay where we are and we will die. Or let's try something that we've never tried before. If it doesn't work, well, we'll die anyway. But it may be that we can discover in this new way opportunity to serve the living God. But you may be the third servant. You can't hoard your faith. If you try to cultivate it away from places where ordinary people work and live, it will be stunted. In my church in Sydney, one of the leaders in the church came to me one day and he said, I've got a problem. In the workplace, they want me to be the union representative. But if I do that, I won't be able to come to the council meetings and the management meetings and all the other meetings that the church holds. What should I do? Well, I suggested that he should go to the steward's position, which he did, and he became involved in helping to work through various problems within his industry. Or a man I met many years ago called Ray Watson, who was a barrister at the time but became one of the family court judges. Tragically, his house was bombed and his wife died in that bombing because he'd given a decision that somebody didn't like. But when I was talking to him, he said, when I go to church, what do I want? I want a service of worship, preferably a service where communion is celebrated, and then I want the church to tell me, get the hell out of here, because where I work is hell for some people. We live in a world where people swear and curse, ignore and doubt, but by words and deeds and involvement, we witness. It's the small people who bury their faith. Christian maturity is to be prepared to mix with other people and to follow the truth wherever it leads. I love these words from Paul Shearer. I heard the sober comment made recently by a very intelligent person that there always seemed to be something wrong with very Christian people. They were odd somehow and said odd things with cramped little ways, as if they'd been forced into a mould they didn't fit. They wore strange clothes and strange expressions. It wasn't fun meeting them, it was funny. Maybe, but that isn't what Christianity's done to them. It's what they've done to Christianity. Amen.